Journey Talks podcast, your favorite podcast to reconnect with gratitude and inspiration, hosted by Jorge Gonzalez. Good morning. Welcome to Journey Talks podcast, your favorite podcast to reconnect with gratitude and inspiration. My name is Jorge Sayago Gonzalez, and I am your host. I am convinced that behind every gratitude, there's a powerful story waiting to be told. And through this space, I want to create an opportunity where we can share these stories and help each other out. Why and how? By embracing and remembering the beautiful gift of our shared humanity. So, as you know, we all share this experience we call life, and we go through situations, we meet people that somehow they leave a footprint in our lives, right? And some of the situations have a prolonged state in our lives. Some of these people come for a very short period of time. Others hang in there for a little longer. The question is how these people have somehow opened doors for transformations, and that had given us an opportunity to discover who we are, or given us an opportunity to step up to the beauty of the gift of who we are and to discover what that is. My hope is that through these conversations, we are reminded that we have access to this place, that we are granted this beautiful gift that we call life. And when we tap into that space of our shared humanity, we find so many beautiful gifts. And that is the experience and the gift of seeing ourselves in each other. Through this podcast, my hope is that we can connect, right? And so today's guest is someone that I'm actually very excited to reconnect with. As you might heard in the past, I always ask at the end of the podcast to my current guest, who could be a potential future guest on the podcast? And a few weeks back, I had an opportunity to interview my friend, and actually our friend, my guest is we share this friendship in common, Rosarito. And Rosarito, as you remember, she's a professor of theater in Texas. And she said, you know what? You should have Armando Garcia. And today, I have had the honor and the privilege to have Armando Garcia with me. Armando, welcome to Journey Talks podcast. How are you doing today?
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here with you, talking, reconnecting, and this is like a huge, you know, um, catch up that we've had in the past few days. Connecting and all that, because we haven't seen each other. I don't know, maybe in 20 years or so, maybe 15 years. I don't know. So it's been great, and the fact that you have this project is very inspiring as well. The moment you called me, the moment Rosarito told me about it or mentioned it, I I was very happy immediately to know that this is the path you're on, and you're creating this space for people to share their stories. So very happy to be here.
Thank you, thank you. So Armando, we were chatting, and in our catch up, you were able to share with me that your journey, your training, and your educational journey brought you through to took you to many different places. And my understanding is that you pursue a master's in psychotherapy, and that you went to Spain to the Universidad Complutense in Spain, right? What was the motivation to go to Spain and to pursue this career?
It's interesting. I was doing my bachelor's degree, and throughout my bachelor's degree, which lasted 7 years, it's unusual. Yeah, it took me a while to decipher what I really wanted to do. And honestly, I decided to do something else. I started, studying biology because I wanted to be a medicine doctor and become a psychiatrist eventually. Um, but I shifted to psychology, so I started my bachelor's degree in psychology, and I abandoned it as well. I started studying French and other stuff, and by the end of my bachelor's degree, of the one that I chose, which was in social sciences research, I thought maybe I should just finish psychology since I only have like maybe 2 3 courses left. I think it was 2 semesters, maybe 8 courses. So I decided to finish it, and throughout finishing it, I decided to study psychology, doing some postgraduate degree on it. And that's where I found psychoanalysis as a theory of the psyche and the human condition. So that inspired me to the level that I decided to go to Spain and do a master's degree, something that no one in my family has ever done. Lived abroad, so far, and especially not in the United States. And the idea of living in Europe was something that I couldn't stop thinking about, you know. So it was a very moving story because some of my friends who were finishing the bachelor's degree at the time with me on the same year were going abroad as well. Some of them to Argentina, to the Netherlands, some of them to Britain, some of them to Spain even. So I remember going with a friend who was applying for her visa to go to Spain to do the master's degree that I was interested in. And I came back home thinking, how come I'm staying? Like, and I was so sad. And I remember my mother saw me so sad. She said, "Do you want to go? Like, is money what's the obstacle? I mean, we'll do whatever. We'll support you." And this is a very moving story because I don't come from a wealthy family either. So, um, and I said, "Yeah, I want to go. I want to go." So, and this is something that has been like this. Has been a pattern in my life where my family see me, embarking in some project that is, comes out of nowhere, and there's no like model before me. Like I'm creating a model of doing something. So that's something that repeats in my life a lot. That I take, the I'm like a trailblazer, in my family. Yeah, in that regard, like a pathfinder. So yeah, I went to Spain thinking that I was going to be there for 2 years. That was the agreement to do the master's degree, which lasted 2 years. And thinking with that in mind, I don't know, I was doing so much um, cultural stuff there. I was involved in many, psychoanalytic organizations in the city. I was exposed to a lot of information and experiences in 2 years because I was thinking I was coming back. Uh, but the moment the master's finished, I had created such a network in Madrid, professionally and also, academically, that I decided to stay there one more year to see if I could finish, my thesis there, and I did. Um, and something interesting about this is that, for me to remain in Spain, that entailed um, a lot of myself in terms of, having to work maybe 4 jobs at the time. Being a waiter was like was something that was constant when I was there. I think almost every year I spent there 6 years, and I was a waiter for five and a half probably. And I was also an English teacher, and I was also a psychotherapist. So it was interesting to see, throughout the day I was assuming so many roles at the time. Yeah, wearing different hats. It was really interesting, and obviously expanded my way of seeing life as well, and seeing myself, what I was capable of. So it was very challenging, but at the same time I grew a lot um, through that. So yeah, I finished and I decided to stay there, being, a regular immigrant, looking looking for something that I didn't know what it was at the time, but I wanted to feel that I was accomplishing something, and that something, I think, in the end, was to become a psychoanalyst in a European city that I liked. Um, and my professors from the master's degree, trusted me a lot, and they were referring clients to me. So it was interesting. I worked a lot with adolescents mainly. I did a lot of work with children and adolescents, also adults. I rented a small space, an office per hour in the city, so it was like very. It was a hustle. It was a hustle. Uh, but yeah, I mean, and by 2010, the economic crisis was hitting very hard. I was doing pretty well, but I wanted more. I felt like I could do more or better, and be more stable. And then my time there had already finished. But I think I stretched that too much, maybe, um, because of how I felt in that city, and all that the city and that society and culture was offering me. As a human being. So I decided to come back to America and started a PhD in clinical psychology, basic primarily because I needed the degree to have access to the license. So it was not necessarily motivated by a theoretical, approach, or academically. I didn't necessarily thought that I needed it, it was like a practical thing to do, and I made it work. It was hard, coming back to Puerto Rico after being in Spain for 6 years. I also lived there from age 24 to 30, so that basically shaped, my adult mind in a way. And it's been really hard. I've been back since 2011. We are in 2023, and I still have, part of that is my foundation as an adult. I didn't know how to cook or do laundry or take care of myself, so I learned all those things in Spain. So I went from my mother's house to a city that I didn't know anyone there, and actually learned through experience. It was hard, but in the end, it made me who I am, and I'm grateful for that.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I've had other Hispanic Latino guests on the podcast, and we all share this dynamic of the fact that in most Latino households, it's okay for you to live at home with your parents until you either have, I mean, whether rather have your professional career done, and then you can move on or you get married. Very contrary to the norm in North America, where people, after when you once you're 18, parents are excited to see you go, and you can interpret that in many different ways, right? But the truth is, yeah, I mean, that period of like your early 20s up to your 30s, for people like us, becomes a very it's a moment of transition, but it's a moment when we also find ourselves in a new light. So I'm glad that you brought that up and that we can remember the story and clarify the meaning of it, right? Because it is a big change in your psyche, and understanding who you are and the responsibilities that are just they just come with the package of adulting. you know
Oh yeah, oh yeah, certainly.
So now, you also, part of your job, correct me if I'm wrong, Armando. You were in Spain. You serve as a psychotherapist and all of that. But when you moved to the States, you had an opportunity. You moved to Phoenix, Arizona, and correct me if I'm wrong. You had an opportunity to provide your services to unaccompanied minors, and their shelters. Can you tell us a little bit about what was that like? What was the role of someone like you in those situations, and a little bit of your experience?
Yeah, sure. It was really hard for me to find a job in Puerto Rico when I came back from Madrid, and although I started the PhD program, I really felt the need to work, to earn money doing what I know how to do, as I was doing in Spain. So I wanted to be a psychologist or a psychotherapist, and it was really hard here to do it because I didn't have a license yet, and so at the time I remember finishing my coursework from the PhD, and you know how life presents you with opportunities that you're not looking for. So I went to this recruiting center here, because someone told me to bring my resume there because they were going to have an opening pretty soon, but they were going to do it through this recruiting center. So when I left my resume and I was leaving the office, the recruiter stopped me and said, "Hey, I know you didn't come here for this, but there's an opening for a job in the United States. Would you be willing to relocate?" And I was like, "Well, let me see what it's about, what that's about." And it was a job as a mental health clinician working with unaccompanied minors in shelters. So basically, these children cross the border without the company of an adult, and ICE apprehends them and puts them in basically in detention centers near the border. But they have like 3 days is the maximum they can stay there if it's a minor. So after 3 days, or within those 3 days, they need to be relocated to an unaccompanied minor shelter to be, to receive all the services a minor in the United States would have to receive by law. And this is a Supreme Court decision from the 1990s. It's Flores versus Reno. That's the case that opened the opportunity for this to happen, because in previously minors were detained with adults. They were mixed with adults and lots of very difficult and horrible thing happen to those children and minors there. So based on that case, and a lot of advocacy from human rights organizations and grassroots organizations as well, they were able to win the case. Yeah, so I worked for the company that recruited me. It's the biggest in the United States, working with unaccompanied minors, and they have presence in three states: California, Arizona, and Texas. The majority of the programs are in Texas and Arizona for this specific company um, that I work for. Is an NGO, very big. This is a profitable field, but it's also a very humane work. And that's actually what moved me. The salary was not great, to be honest, but it was an opportunity that came, to me. I wasn't looking for it, and that's something that I sometimes, if I look at my life, I've made many decisions based on that and what life is offering me. Um, yeah, so I went there. I didn't know anyone in the city. I decided on Phoenix. Um, I had the opportunity to go to Houston or to go to South Texas or Phoenix. That was the three options they gave me. And for some reason, I decided Phoenix, and off I went. And it was really hard in the beginning, because the American culture is very different from what I lived in Spain and from Puerto Rican culture as well. So it took time for me to adjust. Um, but there is something about that type of work and the environment of those shelters that that brings you down to the human condition, and that actually was very enriching to me, not only as a human being but also as a psychotherapist, working with children and youngsters that were coming to the United States to follow a dream that they have, of just overcoming poverty, improving their families' conditions back in their countries. Most of these children are Guatemalan, I have to say. I would say maybe the 90% of the children are from Guatemala. It's very impressive that the I can imagine the generational shift that's going to happen, that's going to create there, with all these adolescents and children coming into the United States. I don't know how that's gonna affect that society there, because the amount of children and adolescents coming is impressive. Some of them don't even speak Spanish; they speak dialects, and you have to use interpreters to work with them, and that's also a layer that's added. There's a lot of uncertainty in their lives because they are there for a while until they can be reunified. So basically, the shelters have basically like two missions. One of them is care provision, so welfare and safety, and the other one is for them to be reunified with someone in the United States. And the clinician, the mental health clinician, is part of that process, helping them basically understand what's going on, adjust to the shelter environment, and sometimes even more, even strengthening those relationships with the people they left behind, because that's actually a healing process as well for most of them, and also reconnecting or connecting with someone that sometimes they have never lived with. So it can be maybe an uncle they saw when they were little. It can be a family friend as well, and there's a lot of assessments that you have to do to avoid or prevent human trafficking, because there's a lot of that also going on. And most recently, I think there's been an opening to the foster care system. So now most of the children are not deported, or they stay in the United States. And although it is a system that has lots of flaws, it's also the best in the world. I have to say that no other country in the world offers what the U.S. offers to immigrant children. So I learned a lot. I learned a lot from them. Most of them, especially when they are above 12, they live as adults almost in their countries. Basically, leading some of them even leading farm work in their family field. They know very much about agriculture, and that's what they are looking for to work in the United States. Yeah, so that's why also the human trafficking aspect is so important in this area. And in terms of therapeutic, work, there is so much you can do. Also with children that are not necessarily too educated. To be frank, they finish maybe the third grade or maybe sixth grade. Most of them the sixth grade, because they need those children back in the field working for the family to be able to eat.
Armando, those are such harsh truth that it's so easy for us to be disconnected from. And it sounds like you had a very profound and special opportunity to reconnect with really complicated aspect of life. And I'm so glad that you were able to be a sojourner with these young men and women, and that you were able to provide a safe space for them, right? I think one thing that your training and my training reminds us of is the power of the presence, right? And when you have someone that is present with you, with no judgment, someone that is able to create a space for you to listen to you and for you to discover new things about your life, that is a really special sacred place, I would call. And I'm very fortunate that you were able to tap into that.
Yeah, and this type of job, Jorge, it's great that you bring that point of creating a safe space for these children. So I had so many breakthrough experience with this working with this population, because for you and me, for example, having a safe space to express yourself is something that you really value, and that's why people go to therapy or go, talk to someone that they trust very much, and they become vulnerable in front of them. But when you come vulnerable in the first place, and at the same time, you don't know these people, you don't know this culture, you're not used to sharing what you feel, because these children are not necessarily allowed to share how they feel. That's not important because they're in survival mode, and there are other things that come before that. So and they are embarked in this idea that they have to provide for their families, and being able to offer that space. I remember one of the children that I worked with. He was very traumatized by the experience of being in the desert for 2 days. This is 2016. um, he tried to cross the desert, to go across the Sonoran Desert, and he was left alone for two nights. So, sleeping in a cave and all that stuff, and you could see the trauma. It was very evident, the trauma, and I was thinking, what can I tell this kid for him to step out of that traumatic scenario that he's seen. He hasn't left the desert in his head. He hasn't left the desert. He's still there. He's still in a cave, hearing the coyotes at night. Fearing the worst. Um, and I remember telling him, "Yeah, I understand everything that you're telling me, but you know what? You arrived. You're here. You arrived somewhere." So, kind of, trying to tell him your journey is over for now, and you are in a different space. The moment I said that, that that kid started crying. That kid was able to calm down. His body language changed, and I told him, you're in a safe space. Nothing is going to happen to you here. Fortunately, you made it. You made it, and you should be proud of yourself. You survived, and this is something that's going to have an impact on your life, and you'll never forget it. But you'll also be proud of yourself because you were able to survive and make it here. And that you should never have to go through that again. And I think those words, in a way, kind of brought not only safety to his mind, but also hope to his being. You know.
Right, right. Armando, we have already dived deep into what this podcast is all about, which is sharing stories of gratitude, and not the superficial gratitude, but the gratitude that comes as a response of pivotal moments in our lives. I mentioned earlier about how this situations or people leave a footprint in our lives, and you're just actually describing the footprints of your own journey. And I'm so thankful that we are already in this place in our conversation. Can we go deeper? Can we just dive into the questions with you?
Absolutely, that's where I live.
Okay, let's do it. So Armando, let me ask you this. Very, it sounds like a very superficial question, but it's actually, in my opinion, a very profound question. What is your relationship with gratitude, and what are you grateful for?
I think when you ask it that way, when you put it that way, the first thing that comes to mind is something that I've been living with for many years. I read a book that had a huge impact in my life, which is The First Man from Albert Camus. It's actually an autobiographical story, and and in that book, I read something that really touched me and has remained with me for all this time. And it's that I think I learned, and this is very related to gratitude, because you are grateful for whatever happens in your life, whatever you're able to be aware of. Um, and, 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 and I think I learned to love the inevitable. So I think when you establish a good relationship or a healthy relationship or a relationship of gratitude with or next an attitude of gratitude with the inevitable, I think you're in a better place with life, because you're able to hold space for for the unexpected, and to hold space to kind of have some question mark in all the ideas that you have about life, that they are not set in stone, and the plans that you have for yourself, the way you push yourself into the future, using your imagination. And that's an exercise that we all do and we all have to do, because we're narrative animals. We're just pushing ourselves into the future, putting ourselves into the future with using our imagination, but we forget that life is also happening, and that's the journey, right? You are basically walking a path that you created in your head, trying to be um, coherent with yourself to the best of your ability, but life presents you with stuff that you were not expecting, and learning how to love the inevitable. So sometimes you just have to sit and say, okay, this is it, this is what's happening. I need to I need to accept. And that radical acceptance, that's a concept that is very is of common use. Yeah, that attitude of radical acceptance. This is inevitable. There's no way I can change this situation right now. The only thing I can do is just process it, understand it, and see what opportunities are offered in this situation. So basically, yeah, it's my relationship with gratitude.
But no, I love it, and thank you for being so honest and just unpacking the juxtaposition, right, of accepting life. I think that that realization gives such liberation to us as humans, because our psyches, we're so prone to look at life from the negative, from the survival mode, and that's a-okay. That means that our brains are working, right? But for us to I don't want to say master our brains or our minds, but to get to know ourselves at a deeper level, where we can then have an awareness of our reaction to what life is, and in spite of all that, get to this place like that you're describing as accepting it for what it is. And that acceptance relieves you from this reactive way of going about life. I mean, and maybe reactive way is not the best way of saying it, but this the way in which we respond to situations, right? But I can, and I'll be curious to hear more about what you have to say about this, because as a psychotherapist, you we are the result of the experiences and the circumstances that in our upbringing, and the tools that somehow we've been given along the way to make meaning out of these situations, right? And so I don't know, anything else you can add to that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, your reaction is very stimulating, and it's bringing a lot of ideas that I want to share. One of them being that life will bring events, and you will approach those events from a perspective. Um, but there's also a lot of editing on that too. You know, the way you're narrating your story, the way you're creating your story, the way you're creating your narrative, basically, um, can be edited. So, and I think that's the magic of psychotherapy and any, self-awareness process. Um, and then I think there's opportunity for you if you exercise that. That's basically an exercise that you have to do, to be able to have into your head that the same way you had a narrative in your head, imagining yourself into the future, and life changed that, and a life event changed that, and puts you in a different position. That doesn't mean that you have to, by accepting what happened, and having a loving relationship with that, doesn't necessarily mean that you have to give up. So there is a thin line there between self-acceptance. I mean, well, self-acceptance as well, but radical acceptance, which includes, self-acceptance. Um, you have to accept what's going on, but you don't have to give up. You don't have to say, well, this is life. Life is a bummer. Life is just something that I cannot deal with. Life will break my plans every single day. So there is obviously, like you were saying, a negative approach or a survival mode approach that puts you into a fearful, standpoint, and you can approach that life from there. And sometimes life pushes you so hard that you fall, and you don't want to stand up again because you're fearful of falling again. Um, but the exercise of life is not, it's not necessarily um, standing all the time or walking all the time, or being on the floor all the time. It's basically the process of knowing how to fall and knowing how to step up back again. So I think that's a metaphor that I use a lot. It's not about just succeeding every single step of the process, because that's not going to happen. Failure teaches you so much if you're open to it. If you're open to it, for sure. And that's one thing. And the other thing is, speaking about journey, I use this image all the time about the GPS. You got to know where you are in order to move somewhere. And even to use a map, you need to look at yourself. So where am I? What am I? Where do I want to go? And I learned from a psychoanalyst in Madrid a long time ago, something that was very like mind blowing. And this is also an image that helps me greatly. And it's the fact that you can go with your mind wherever you want. You can go with your mind, but your body brings your mind wherever you are. So there is a limit.
Ooh, yes, that's nice. Can you say that again? Can you say that again? I love that.
Yes, yes, of course. There is a the mind is unlimited in the sense that you can create anything with your mind, and you can take yourself in your head with using your imagination. You can take yourself anywhere, good or bad. You can use your imagination for good things or for bad things. And you can create these scenarios that can be catastrophic or it can be idyllic, or utopia or utopic. So you can either take yourself to a utopia or to a dystopia. So so but necessarily your mind has to go to where your body is. There's no mind without body, and you have to be where you are, and that's part of receiving life as it comes. Like, yeah, my mind was there. I saw myself with a PhD diploma in my hand when I started it, because that's how I imagined myself. But in between, from starting to finish it, lots of things happened, and there's no way you can avoid those things. You have to live through them, and that's part of the path. That's part of the path that you have to take your mind through, and that's something very important and very powerful. If you are able to be open to that idea, and to allow yourself to think through it, not rushing yourself, but just accepting the fact that you are existing in a body. And I think that's part of the metaphor right there.
Yes, I've heard this a lot lately, and it's how, which I am so excited to hear this in so many different conversations, Armando, and it's how the body brings you back to the present moment, and how being with the body, because your mind could go, like you say, it can go to outer space, but your body is always going to bring you back to earth, to this present moment, and developing this relationships, this attuneness with our bodies, to allow and to respect what our bodies are telling us, which I think, oh my goodness, I can see how this conversation can take hours, you know, because if we start unpacking the layers of how the body responds to certain circumstances, stimuli, how the body is trying to protect yourself, and the relationship between mind and body, there's so much to talk about it. But your statement just reminded me of how the body is just a wonderful reminder of the present moment. You're here right now. And how much we can learn from that. Let's just keep that in the back burner. Let me ask you something, Armando. So you talked about failure. You talked about failure and how failure can teach us. And one of my questions for you is, can you recall a moment, a situation in your life that looking back you now realize that you know yourself better because of it, and that you can look back at it with gratitude? And I'm actually, what I'm asking is there a moment of failure in our life, in your life, that now looking back you realize, wow, this was shitty as hell, this was really hard, but I have such a deep and greater awareness, I mean self-awareness about who I am, and hopefully this allows me to show up in life and for others in a different light, in a different way. What would you say about that?
I think I'm gonna open up myself a little bit here because there's no other way.
You have to be vulnerability. We're gonna be vulnerable together. Let's do this.
Yeah, in order to hold the conversation, the way you're posing the question, that this is something David White, which is a poet that I admire a lot and has had a great influence in who I am right now. For the past few years, I think it was 2019 I discovered, or 2018 I discovered David White's work, and he has had a very, like, a huge impact in my life in terms of how I see myself, and not only as a human but also as a man. Um, and, and and he talks about the beautiful questions of life, and also how you hold the conversation, how you answer those questions, and how you keep talking, how you sustain that conversation. And in order for me to sustain this conversation that we started, I need to be a little bit more open, and maybe share something very private, but at the same time, and recent as well. I think the what I would say was the most impactful, like, failure that I had. It's a relationship that I had with a woman, like a romantic relationship that I tried to make work for approximately 4 years, um, on and off, and it was very challenging for me as a man, as a human being. Even though I thought about myself, in such a successful way in terms of relating to others. I have great friendships that I have sustained throughout the years. I'm very good friends with my, well, not necessarily close, but I ended up my previous relationships in very good terms. But this one I couldn't, you know, and I think that's because for me the most important thing was not necessarily to sustain that relationship over time, an endless relationship, until that, uh, until death. That's not the way I saw the relationship. um, but I think she was thinking about the relationship for it to be, long lasting, and to me it's part of the journey. When you are in a relationship, you embark in a journey, and you keep each other company, and you help each other grow, and if that's sustainable over time, that's beautiful. But to me, the most important thing is to be walking, with someone beside you, and and I think events that happen in the relationship, I think, put us both in adversarial mode. Instead of walking one next to each other, facing forward, looking at the same path, we were facing each other and unable to walk. Just unable to walk, just engaged in competition, just engaged in adversarial, conversations. Who's right, who's wrong, um, and who did well, who didn't. There was a bunch of other layers that I've been able to understand after that, but that basically put me in a position of failure in terms of not knowing what to do. Like I I don't know what to do, and I'm a solver. Like I face a problem and I put my head around it, and I normally I'm able to find a solution, and a viable solution and a sustainable solution. That's how my brain works, and that's how I see myself as well. So not being able to solve that because there was no problem to be solved. I have to live through my emotions, and I was blocking them. I just put myself into my head. I just brought myself into my head, wanting to have logical solutions to something that is relational. I had to open myself, and I opened my heart, man. And it was being very hard because I was so scared. I was so scared of being hurt or being manipulated, um, of doing it wrong as well, of missing stuff, and this I don't know, fight or flight response, like mode, and trying to protect everything, and just you know thinking also that I was responsible for every single thing that happened in the relationship. And that comes from my background in my family as well, that I somehow ended up thinking that I was responsible for lots of things that I wasn't. I laugh at myself because that's the only way, like when you see yourself in those positions, you say, why were you there? Why were you thinking that way? So, all these things, sum up and basically taught me a lot, in that regard, because I can I can I can easily say right now, um, that I had a perspective, that I was approaching life from a perspective of wholeness, and I thought myself as a whole. In my head, I picture myself as a whole human being. But we're all partial. We can only do so much, and I think that's an American expression that I value a lot. You can only do so much. There's a reach to your arms. You can stretch your arm, and that's your reach. There's a scope always in every mission. There's a scope. You can't do everything. You can only do so much, and that took me into a journey, Jorge. And I think, again, life takes care of you. Like I left the relationship in doing something that I don't feel proud of. I basically ended the relationship in a conversation that was kind of rushed, to be frank. And as I said, I was not connecting with my feelings. I was also hurting myself, not only the other person. And that's something that you learn through relationships, that when you are in a relationship with someone, whatever you do, it affects the other person, especially if it touches that person's expectations and ideas of the relationship. So it's really hard to listen when you're always talking, and when you don't silence yourself in your head, it's really hard to listen to the other person. And that happened to both of us. So if you don't silence those voices in your head, it's really hard to listen to the other person's story, and it's really hard not to hurt them, and not to end up hurting yourself, because when you don't silence that voice in your head, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're listening to yourself. That means that there is some aspect of you that is tirelessly putting you in fear, that is tirelessly putting you in your egotistic mode. And it's really difficult, especially for men, I think, to step out of that and actually dive into your heart. And fortunately enough, I moved to Phoenix, back to Phoenix, and looking for, to have some sort of redemption through my career. Like, okay, I didn't succeed in relationships, so let's go and try, career. That's very of our times, and very, um, manly, like, and off I went, and you know what happened, Jorge? I lost the job. 3 months. I was fired for the first time in my life. I've never even had like a verbal or a written, reprimand at work. Never in my career. And I lost a job. Nothing related to my performance, fortunately, but I lost my first job, as a licensed clinical psychologist, because I had recently became licensed. So, and that pushed me into a path of self-reflection inevitably, and that put me in front of the mirror for a while, and I think, and that's also why it's now looking back, um, the way I approached the end of that relationship was a failure. And I felt like a failure throughout the relationship as well, I have to say, not knowing what to do, not understanding what I had to what moves I needed to make, what adjustments I needed to do with myself, and how I was, inhibiting myself from learning actually how I felt and who I am in my emotional self. And that's something that came to me in a way that I wasn't expecting. So I was alone in back in Phoenix, not having a job, not knowing what to do. So I decided to stop. Like I said, no, I don't know where I am right now. I don't know who I am right now, and I put myself in this situation. So I take accountability for it. I'm not going to blame anyone, not even the people who fired me and brought me to Phoenix, offering me a job that was supposed to be to last a lot of time. And they basically were financially, unable to maintain me as an employee. Um, so something in life, changed and inevitably put me in the front of the mirror.
Armando, I think I am so grateful that you feel comfortable with me to open up in the way that you have. I'm hearing so many different things in this brief story of yours. Um, and I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. I know I know it takes courage to open up and to be vulnerable. Yet we know, and I'm just gonna echo Brene Brown's work. When the beauty and the gift of being vulnerable creates such a unity space amongst ourselves, amongst humans. And so, I mentioned it earlier at the beginning of the podcast. My goal with these conversations is to really highlight the aspect, the important aspect, the intrinsic aspect of our shared humanity. And you said two things in this story that caught my attention, and it is allowing yourself through feel your emotions, you know, and then this whole notion of your masculinity, and in our conversations prior to being together today, you really expressed to me that you have an interest in unpacking this a little more, and I think this is a perfect segue for us to go there, just because I think from what I'm grasping and understanding from our conversation, we're talking about the masculinity of the male energy of wisdom and understanding, and women out there, that you all bring something so beautiful that we men have a hard time with, and that is getting to know yourself, your intuition, and being wise. For us men, the programming that we've had, and bad programming that we've been exposed to, have prohibited us from really acknowledge that we have to access get in touch with our vulnerability and with our wounds, with our failures, in order for us to be human. At least that is my personal experience, and I'm hearing a lot of that in that story. I'm hearing, Armando, that life put you in a situation where there was no other way and no other place to escape from but to get to face who you are and see that person in the mirror, and to befriend that person in the mirror. Because I think what we have done in the past is to hate that person, to repudiate that person. We are embarrassed of that person. We're seeing and looking our shadows. We're face to face to the things that we don't like about our personalities, that sometimes we don't have language to describe, right? Yet we know how it feels. We know the repulsive body responses that we have when we are in places of shame, being embarrassed. I, for myself, recognize that I didn't have those tools. And when I was confronted with somebody putting a mirror in front of me of my areas of growth, my reaction was I was aggressive. I was so embarrassed, and actually the word is I was so prideful that I couldn't tolerate and handle that moment of shame, that moment where I was not living up to the idea of the man that I was supposed to be, of the man that I thought my partner needed me and wanted me to be. And so this process of developing a healthy masculinity, and getting to know ourselves and love ourselves for who we are, with the good, the bad, and the ugly, that is quite the journey. And so I'll be curious to hear more about how do you unpack that for yourself. Who have been the voices that have sort of like guided you throughout this process? You mentioned Richard Rohr. I was so excited when you brought Richard Rohr, because Richard Rohr has been a wonderful companion in my journey as well. So can you tell me more about it? I mean, do you think I'm putting my finger on things that you really were trying to express?
Yeah, yeah, certainly. Yeah, absolutely. And I think you brought even more beautiful language to it. Like, like because there are so many ways you can say these things, and you chose your 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 word choosing was really really good, and I appreciate it. Because it puts me in a space of calm as well. I feel understood, and that's something very important in our conversation. I feel understood by you, and that helps me even open up more. So, um, I think, Jorge, that um, my experience as a man in this world, I have to talk about my lineage inevitably. You know, so my father's father died when he was 7 years old. When my father was 7 years old. And my father died when I was 14 years old. And honestly, I didn't have a lot of men to look after, in terms of a model. And I lost a few friends as well growing up. So death has been very present in my life. And having that relationship with my lineage and understanding myself through that was really hard. And then on my maternal side, my maternal uncle went through a lot of there's a lot of hard things also there on the men's side. My mother lost her brother when she was maybe 14 years old, and he drowned saving my youngest uncle. So there's a traumatic story there on my mother's side as well related to men. So my youngest uncle um, became a heroin addict from a very young age as well. So you can imagine, when I look around and see the men in my life and my lineage, it's who am I? No wonder I'm a trailblazer. I don't want any of these paths. I want to create my own, and I think that brings me back to Albert Camus and the First Man. That someone that's creating himself, using whatever he has available, and trying to make the best out of it. And I think I also had a difficulty to step aside of those stories. And most recently, as I was mentioning to you before we started recording, there is a story about my maternal family that actually impacted me recently and also put me in perspective in terms of who I am as a man and what I'm called to do in my family. Because you don't know what your role is in your family entirely until crisis happen. And I think that's very very important. In 2021, I had to respond to an emergency with my uncle, my maternal uncle, the one that had a heroin addiction. I found him on the floor, in what it seemed to be an overdose situation, and I had to carry him, in my arms out of the bathroom. He was a 6'1" man. I'm only 5'8", so he was big. And I had to call 911, and I had to not only respond to the crisis, which was in itself very difficult, but also to tell my uncle's story in the hospital. I think that was the most impactful thing to me. Yeah, and that's where I learned even more about my lineage. And so basically the story is, my uncle was an addict, and he was in prison for most of my childhood. I remember going to jail to prison to see him, to visit him when I was a child, and seeing all that atmosphere there, growing up, and also having, when they asked me, "Are you his son?" And I was like, "No, his son died at age 19, um, in the middle of a shooting, right?" It, it's impressive. Ironically enough, in a housing project right across the street from the hospital. So they probably took him to that same hospital. after he died, or try to save him. So we're talking about my youngest cousin at the time, who was murdered, basically, and this is this man's son, and he also had a daughter when he was very young, and that daughter died as well. So we're talking about a very difficult story that I had to tell again and again. I mean, I didn't have to go into details, but they were asking all these questions and how he lived and where he lived, and and it was so difficult. And that's what that's where life puts you again into the inevitable, in front of the inevitable, and asks you to respond. This is your role here. So what what was my calling there, like to unite a family that was broken through, due to addiction and due to trauma. The pieces were disconnected, and I had to somehow, Jorge, I did, I don't know now, I don't know how I did it. I think I had to start opening my heart and say I had to do this, and I had to do this to the best of my abilities. This was a very difficult situation for my family, and I was the one who had the calling to respond and basically be the leader of this. So I had to tell my grandmother. I was the one who brought the bad news to my grandmother, who lost another son. It was really, really hard. It was really, really hard, and that put me in a path of reflection. And who am I, as a man in this family? What distinguishes me from my cousins and my brother? My brother, I have an older brother who's from my mother's first marriage, and he is, his father is alive. You know, I'm the only one who didn't have necessarily a father figure, since I was very young, and that kind of spoke to me greatly. And I need to take care of this. I need to take care of these lacks that I have. I need to take care of this situation of understanding that even if I challenge myself to be the greatest, I need to acknowledge where the gaps are in terms of who I am as a man, and what have I chosen, um, as symbols or models in my life to create myself as a human being, but mainly as a man. Um, and that really that was very powerful. Obviously, I had to be the leader, and it was sometimes when you're called to be a leader, and you believe that you are not to share your emotions, you are not to share your how challenging emotionally this is for you, because people are looking at you, for for direction. And it's really hard to to cry and point to where you have to go to where you have to go next. So basically I had to keep my composure, and I at the time I thought, well, I know these people have taught me a lot. I know this side of my family have taught me a lot, and had taught me a lot about struggle, had taught me a lot about trauma, and I need to acknowledge that and cherish it. This is what life offered me as a human being, so I need to cherish it, and I need to do something beautiful with it, and that's what I challenge myself with. Yeah. So, and it speaks back to what I said before, about loving the inevitable.
Yeah, it's very interesting to hear your story and connect it with the person that you are today, connected with the psychotherapist that you are today, hearing your process of taking your life story, the inevitable, and how do you turn it around into something that can provide wisdom, into something that can provide a greater and deeper self-awareness and knowledge of self, right? Um, I'm curious to hear a little more about this whole concept of, because I heard a couple things. I heard this one thing that I also, I mean, I will be vulnerable with you and with the audience. This whole concept of the wound of the father, right? And so it what I and correct me if I'm wrong, Armando, but I heard I heard a story of a young man who whose models of men of good positive male figures was a bit was struggling a little bit, and if we are honest, we know that there's a story behind it. We're so quick to demonize these stories and to say, oh, well, my uncle was a drug addict, and so you wanna separate yourself from those things, right? Because a part of yourself says, well, this is not a good example for me, or I don't want to be close to any of this thing. I don't want this in my life. But the truth is that these difficult situations, they become teachers, and if we develop the courage to start a different relationship with these aspects of our journey, we gain something new. So my question to you is, uh, you mentioned Richard Rohr, and you mentioned in our conversation how, I mean, one of the things that he talks about is this process of, we have a bunch of men, sometimes in their 70s, that have not had an opportunity to weep and to cry and to recognize the suffering that they have been carrying for so long. And then the flip side, he also mentions that, sometimes you have this old souls, with people that are rather young, but they are able to tap into, understand, and to love themselves in such a way that they can, tap into some wisdom there. Um, what have you learned about yourself? Because you talked about the roles that you took in your family and the role that you had to embrace. But what did Armando uh, learn from this experience? What part of yourselves do you feel like you can look with compassion, and then go into this family situation or to any situation, and you go in from a place of self-experience and compassion for yourself and compassion for other people? What would you have to say about that?
Thank you for that question. And I'm going to start with Richard Rohr, um, and I'm going to continue to answer this question. So I'm going to link both things. So I think there are several aspects of Richard Rohr's work, um, that spoke to me, that resonate with me greatly, that resonate with me as a man, as a human being. He talks about father hunger. That's a concept that, yeah, he talks about father hunger, and that, in the events that he creates for men, for men to kind of tap into their spirituality. He talks about that, and he also talks about rituals that in every culture there's a ritual for you to become a man. Maybe in Latin American cultures, we have, for women it's more evident, like the quinceañera, or even the period. When the period arrives, it's like, well, you're a woman now. There's a bodily, situation that puts them, into womanhood. So they're no longer a child. They're now a woman. They're becoming women. Um, and the quinceañera is more symbolic. You present this young woman, who's possibly, had her period already. So she can bear children, basically, right? Yeah, she can bear children. So she's a woman, or a woman in process, but basically she already had a biological process that puts her in that position. We women don't have that. So it's also a the symbolic aspect of it. There are some things, and I think work, being able to work and to show yourself as someone who can work, who can perform a job. I think that's very much into masculinity in that regard. As a ritual, I mean, or as a symbolic, step that you take, or milestone that you take in the way of becoming a man. But there are other rituals that are more subtle, and I think Richard Rohr taps into them very beautifully. And I encourage everyone, to listen to his podcast interviews, or read his books. And if you can afford it, go to one of these, retreats. But he talks about, men that have been even successful at work, and that still experience that father hunger at the age of maybe 50 or 60, that are weeping, asking for their father's acceptance, for their father's forgiveness, for their father's love and understanding. And most of them, didn't get that, and that's a wound, the wound that you were talking about before, and Richard Ward talks about in other terms, in terms of that father hunger. And you can see that, and you can see that even more now that you hear so many stories, at least around me, of men that I have a lot of female friends who are single mothers, and those fathers are completely absent of those children's lives, and that's also leaving marks right there. So this is also a calling to whoever listens to this and don't have a relationship with their children because they're divorced or they're separated from their children's mothers. And I think there's a lot of thought that needs to be put on that. So yeah, I think ultimately I never felt accepted by my father the way I was, and even though I was a very successful student, um, up to maybe seventh grade, eighth grade. He died when I was in ninth grade. So right before that middle school part, um, I think I never saw in him any sign of acceptance or even pride. Being proud of me. So that I took that upon myself, and in terms of challenging me to be better, and then that there's never enough, so I have this boss inside my head that's challenging me all the time, and that's telling me you could have done better, 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 you could have done differently. Oh yeah, you failed there, like, oh, you didn't take this into account. What were you thinking? Oh, you were thinking about that. Oh, so that's a presence in my head, that not enoughness, and it's interesting because I challenge that with what I said before, and I'm going to say it differently now. I challenge that with good enoughness. There's only so much you can do. There's only so much you can do, and it's not giving up. It's just, hey, i'm not gonna I'm not gonna beat myself up with this, because you can use experiences, as a whip, and whip yourself with it, or you can put everything on a table and say, oh, let's look at this and let's see if it can be done differently, not necessarily better, but the fact that you're thinking about doing it differently, it's so in itself it's better, because you're pausing, you're taking the time, because if it's important, it requires time. Important and urgent are not the same thing. There are things that, yeah, there are things that require, um, an urgent response, a sense of urgency. But the really important things in life that entails, processes and relationships and decision making, that is going to shape your life. Those important decision makings, that takes time. There's no shortcut to that. And yeah, especially if you're moving or getting married, or whatever whatever marriage you're talking about, right? Because David White talks about the three marriages, the marriage with yourself, the marriage with your work, and the marriage with your partner. There are three marriages, and they're all entangled. They all speak about who you are as a human, and there's no separation of them. It's the same person living in three marriages and three commitments that are very important. Um, and that relational approach to life, I think, is very beneficial to think about yourself. How am I showing up in this? How am I showing up in that? And to whom? And what's the conversation I'm having with that? And when you ask yourself those questions, I think that inevitably you're going to gain some wisdom, and that's what I think I've been doing in the past year, and now, I think the last part of your question was mostly related to what have I learned through that path, right? And and what are the things that have impacted me in terms of who I am as a man. I started reading, Jorge. I started reading about masculinity. I started listening to podcasts, and I started asking myself stuff, and I identified. I was able to identify this self analysis that I did. Um, Many things that I hadn't thought about, mostly through writing. Journaling was very beneficial to me, and I didn't write every day, but there were some things that were so thick in my head, that I had such a hard time disentangling and handling it. It's like if you're dealing with some material stuff, you're touching it, and it's really hard to handle it. So you have to put it somewhere because it's hard to hold it in your head and deal with it and solve it in your head. So put it somewhere. That's what I told myself every time. It was like, mm, this is like I'm ruminating about this. It's really hard for me to have like a nice conversation with this. Let's put it somewhere, and then I'll have some distance from it and approach it from a different perspective and have a different conversation. Maybe start a different conversation. Let's start over. So I did that a lot, and I think I was able to identify so many things about myself, and also through that process, because when you're sad, you forget about when you were happy, and when you feel miserable, you forget about what actually has made you feel important in life. So, and I think shifting between those, trying to bring balance, trying to bring balance a little bit to it, and and one of the tools that I created for myself, and I think this touches a lot with the path I started with yoga, with doing yoga almost a year ago, March last year. Uh, and that relationship I've created with my body. I had been doing fitness for 4 years before I started yoga. So fitness is a whole different approach. It's approach about strength and about accomplishing something very, um, um, how can I say this? Very imperialistic, like very like I want to dominate this. I want to, I want to have more muscle. I want to have more strength. I want to weight more, more pounds. Like do more reps, and do it more days. Yeah, and do it more days. Like it's never enough. When you're in that, not enoughness mindset, fitness is beautiful for that. It kind of creates that terrible condition for you to hide from yourself. Um, when there is a wound, when there is something that is actually calling for you to pay attention to. So when I started yoga, which is the other thing, this is a whole different approach. And I'm gonna quote my teacher here. It's like you you put yourself in a hard situation, but you approach it from a calm perspective. Because the yoga poses, you have to breathe through them. So you're reprogramming your nervous system. You're putting yourself in a pose that is challenging and is hurting and is creating all this stress, but you're breathing through it. Nothing's gonna happen. You're gonna survive this, and tomorrow you're gonna be able to do it again, calmly, calmly, and you do it to the best of your ability without hurting yourself. And that's life. You can translate that into so many things, aspects of your life, and that's the beauty about yoga if you approach it that way, for sure. There are so many things you can do with yoga, but if you approach it that way, I think it's very beneficial, and that's part of the things that I've learned. To be compassionate with myself, to not beat myself up that much, especially with yoga, because I reached to that point in which I was beating myself with yoga. I didn't do enough. Um, I didn't go to the studio today, like, and I hurt myself physically. I injured myself when I was approaching it that way. So it kind of, the process itself speaks back to you, and that's also a metaphor or for what life is as well. When you don't approach it healthily, you're going to hurt yourself, and you got to be able to hold that wound and being open to heal, doing less or doing differently. And I think that's what I've learned, honestly, Jorge, because I could keep talking and bringing more examples, because I think it brought more awareness. I'm not infallible. I'm just open. I'm just open to. It opened me up. It opened me more. I'm sorry. Um, I feel more connected with myself, and also I adopted a dog, um, who's a love digger. So she digs love every day in me. So she brings out, my parental self, basically, and also it is very moving sometimes when I see myself as a caregiver, and 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 processing those fears that something's going to happen to her. And I adopted a female dog. um, and a very small dog, very like docile dog, very beautiful and care, and loving dog, and inspires so much love in me that my heart has a gem already. There, my loving heart, not the biological one.
This is a perfect way for us to sort of like uh, go back to gratitude and perhaps bring this to sort of some sort of closer, because I know we can be here for a long time, but I love the fact that you bringing, whether it was intentional or not, that this beautiful gift of your dog, an animal, your companion, is giving you the space for you to access all these different layers of yourself as a human being, and your masculinity as a caregiver. And it's funny, right? Because I mean, for all those dog lovers out there, we all know, because I'm a dog lover myself, and it's so beautiful to develop this relationship because they love us unconditionally. And I don't know if you feel the same way, but I didn't discover what it was like to love unconditionally until I had an opportunity to really deepen in my relationship with my dog. And it's just a different way, and this brings me, this makes me think of parenting and all of the stuff, 'cause I'm not a parent, so I can only imagine what this does for other people, right, and for other humans. But anyways, thank you. I want to say, Armando, you have been so brave, you have been so courageous, and I love the way in which you brought you not your inquisitive mind, but your critical mind into our conversation, and the way in which you allowed me to enter and to walk with you, along with you, and remembering certain pivotal moments in your life. For me, this is very important. This is honestly what this podcast is all about, which is Journey Talks podcast, right? This talks about the journey and the dynamics and the things that we learn along the way. So piggybacking on that, I always ask people, what's a quote, who's a person that you are, that has been a north for you, or a quote, or someone that you're really vibing with lately, that is helping you in this process of life.
Well, lately my yoga teacher has been. She's had an impact in my life that I don't think she's aware of, to be honest. But the whole channel that she's opened up to me, um, as a human being, has taken me to start reading about what Ashtanga yoga is and that path, you know. And that's basically what my life has been in the past 8 months or 6 months. Um, and I've been looking at life through that lens, and in looking into that, I think I tapped into, I found this Spaniard teacher, yoga teacher as well. Um, Jose Carballal, his name is, and he talks about yoga in Spanish, which is something. Spanish is my first language, so it touches differently. And he's very, and he's also like someone that's communicating that a lot. My teacher does it in the studio in the shala, but he's public. He was an actor, so he's a professional actor, so people know him as a public figure, and he's always like publishing, posting, and doing all these interventions online that are very powerful and that teach me a lot, in a very simple way. Yeah. So I think Ashtanga yoga has been a teacher, and my teacher has been, just great, and someone like a lighthouse, like something I that guides me.
So lots of gratitude to all of our teachers, right? Regardless of what they look like, and how they come to our lives. All right. So then one thing I always ask people at the end of the podcast is this, which is the reason why you're here, is who do you think could be a future guest here on Journey Talks podcast?
Yeah, so Karen Kelly, who's my yoga teacher, I think she'll do great. I also think that Barbara Guzman, who's also someone that graduated with us from high school.
I was gonna say that name is familiar. Shout out for Barbara.
Yeah, she lives in San Antonio, Texas, and I think she would do great. Great addition to your project. And I can think of my cousin, whose name is Jose Bernardo Marquez, and I think he also might be a good addition. Also from Discipulos, also from the same high school that we graduated.
Same high school. Well, here we go. Well, friends, this is has been another episode of Journey Talks podcast. Armando, I want to thank you for this amazing time, for this amazing conversation. Thank you for listening. Thank you for giving me the gift of just sharing this space with you, and thank you for your trust in me and hosting a space where we can just share these stories. I look forward to having you again in the future if you're open to it, because it sounds like we have more conversations that we can follow up with. So let's keep that in mind. All right.
Yeah, yeah, certainly, certainly. That this is just the beginning.
Wonderful, wonderful. Friends, like I said, this has been another episode of Journey Talks podcast, your favorite podcast to reconnect with gratitude and inspiration. I look forward to connecting you again in the future. Take care. Thank you for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe to our channel. Share your feedback, hit that notification bell, and let's keep the conversation going.